The lighting in the restaurant was soft, warm gold, glancing off the rim of every glass and polished fork. We were seated near a corner window where the late evening sun filtered through gauzy curtains, making everything appear more expensive than it was. A server in a crisp apron had just refilled our water glasses and taken the dessert menus. It was the kind of place my daughter liked to bring clients, or, on rare occasions, her mother. Talia sat across from me, her back straight, posture deliberate. She wore a burgundy silk blouse I hadn't seen before, the kind that whispers, "I don't buy on sale." Her makeup was perfect, though the smile stretched across her face wasn't. I knew that smile. It didn't reach her eyes. I'd seen it before in meetings at family gatherings, whenever she was about to say something that wasn't quite as kind as she'd pretend it was. Grayson, her husband, was beside her, fiddling with his tie. He always adjusted it before something performative like a speech or a lie. I should have known then. Talia reached for her wine glass and gently raised it. "A toast," she said, her voice bright, too bright. Grayson's fork paused midair. I glanced up from my napkin. Something in the air had shifted, like the static before lightning. To my mother, Talia continued, her glass held high. "Who's always around, always a failure." For a second, I wasn't sure I'd heard her right. Then the silence fell over our table like a dropped curtain. At the surrounding tables, forks clinked and conversations continued, unaware or pretending to be. Grayson let out a short, awkward laugh, the kind people make when they think they're supposed to. My hands didn't move. I didn't reach for my drink or adjust my posture. I just looked at her. She took a sip of wine, her eyes daring me to react. I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I folded my hands calmly in my lap and listened to the small sound of her glass returning to the table. The moment hung between us, thin and tight, like a violin string waiting to be plucked. Then I reached for my own drink. I held the stem of my glass between two fingers, lifted it slowly, and met my daughter's gaze. She didn't flinch. Neither did I. "A toast," I said, letting my voice land softly in the silence she had created. "To the failure who just canceled the account paying your mortgage, your car, and your credit cards." I didn't blink. Neither did she. A flicker passed over her face, just enough to tell me she hadn't expected that. Not here. Not in public. Not from me. Grayson straightened in his seat, lips parting, searching for the right expression. "Come on, Ivera," he said with a strained laugh. "It was a joke. You know how Talia is." She didn't mean it. I turned my eyes to him just briefly, then back to my daughter. I set the glass down with the same care I'd used to lift it, then reached for my phone and my purse. My fingers didn't tremble. I'd rehearsed this. I opened the banking app and turned the screen toward them. The account name, the red text, closed. Balance 0.0. No pending transactions. Talia leaned forward, eyes scanning the screen like she hoped she'd misread it. "You're serious," she whispered. "I've never joked about money," I said. "That seems to be more your thing." She looked stunned, but what surprised me was how quickly it shifted to indignation. That old defiant curl of her lip returned. "You're cutting us off just like that?" "After everything." "Yes," I interrupted. "Exactly like that. No warning, no discussion. The same way you decided I was fair game for public humiliation over creme brulee." Her voice dropped an octave. "Mom, this is not the place. You chose the place," I said. "And the audience." Grayson put a hand on her arm, but she shook it off. "You can't just do this. We have obligations. We have payments." I sipped my wine slowly, deliberately. "Then you'll learn to pay them. Like I did. Like adults do." Her complexion had gone pale the way it used to when she was a child and caught in a lie. But she was no child now. Just a grown woman suddenly realizing the free ride was over. Grayson tried again. "We're your family." I didn't look at him. "Then perhaps you should have treated me like more than a wallet with a pulse." I placed the phone back in my purse, folded my napkin on the table, and looked out the window for a moment, just long enough to let the finality settle. I could hear Talia's breath, catching the soft clink of ice in her untouched water glass, the silence that finally reached the neighboring tables. The performance was over, but mine hadn't even begun. She used to clutch my hand when crossing the street. I remember how small her fingers were, how they'd tighten whenever a car passed too close or the wind blew too strong. That was before she learned to hide discomfort, before she learned to perform confidence. I was 40 when I became a widow. One minute, I was folding laundry and planning groceries. The next, I was identifying a body at a construction site morgue. Miguel slipped. No warning, no insurance. Just a hard fall and a harder life waiting on the other side of grief. Talia was 12. I told her gently, but grief has no gentle version for children. She cried once, just once, and then began avoiding eye contact. From that day, it was as if she understood without being told that everything had changed, that I would never again be the soft, predictable version of her mother. I worked nights cleaning offices downtown and spent my afternoons selling insurance door to door. It was exhausting, but I told myself it was temporary, that once she finished high school and got into college, everything would ease. It never did. The first time I noticed her pulling away was when she was 16. I arrived at her school event straight from work wearing a dress I'd bought secondhand and shoes that pinched. She didn't see me at first. I watched her laugh with her friends, radiant and light. But when our eyes met, she paused just a second too long, then looked away. At home, she said nothing, but she no longer asked me to come to events. When she got accepted to university, I cried alone in the kitchen. She never saw the list of things I sold to cover her dorm deposit. Not just furniture, not just the old jewelry from my mother. I sold her wedding ring, the only heirloom I had left. I did it willingly. I thought it meant something to give everything so she could start with more than I had. She didn't ask where the money came from. She never asked. College changed her quickly. Her calls came less often, and when they did, they were functional. I need money for books. There's a lab fee. I might lose housing if I don't pay by Friday. I never said no. Once I visited her unannounced, thinking a surprise might be welcomed. She wasn't home, but her roommate let me wait. I heard Talia come in through the back door, laughing, her voice loud and easy. Then I heard her say, clear as glass, "Yeah, she's still here. Dead weight, but she covers the bills." I didn't confront her. I didn't cry. I simply gathered my coat and left while she was still in the kitchen. That phrase stuck with me for years. Dead weight. As if I were some burden she dragged along for appearances useful only in the way a silent sponsor is useful. I told myself she didn't mean it. I told myself the pressures of youth and image made her careless. I told myself a lot of things to keep the story from collapsing. But the story had already collapsed. I'd just kept walking on top of its wreckage, pretending the road was still there. When she raised that glass tonight and called me a failure, I didn't hear something new. I heard an echo, familiar, practiced. But this time, I had nothing left to give that could be taken without consent. And for the first time in decades, I was ready to let her feel the difference. It was a Monday when Marvin called. I had just finished sorting laundry, standing barefoot in the kitchen with a cup of tea cooling in my hand. The sound of his voice, steady, deliberate, made me set the cup down before I even knew why. "Ivera," he said, "we need to talk. Can you come in this week?" I hadn't spoken to Marvin in months. We'd met years ago when Miguel passed. He handled the estate, the insurance, and later my small investments. He was never dramatic. If Marvin sounded concerned, it was because there was reason to be. "I can come tomorrow," I said. "What's going on?" There was a pause. "Talia came to see me last week." I stayed quiet. "She asked about options." specifically about transferring property before it's too late. Her words, not mine. Before what's too late, I asked, though I already knew. She brought documents, he said gently. Templates for power of attorney. Guidelines for guardianship procedures. And several forms related to mental incapacity evaluations. My throat went dry. I reached for the chair behind me and sat down. She said, "You've been forgetful lately." Marvin continued missing bills, acting erratically. She asked if we could start preparations just in case. She said that, yes. I told her I'd need medical documentation, of course, that I wouldn't move forward without your consent. "Thank you," I murmured. She left a folder, he added. "I haven't opened it. I wanted you to see it first." I didn't say much else. We confirmed the appointment. He offered reassurances, the kind that don't fix anything, but come from someone who still remembers you as a whole person. When I hung up, the silence in my house felt different, thicker, heavier. I opened the cabinet where I kept my papers. Tax returns, property deeds, insurance records, bank statements. I pulled them out one by one and laid them across the table. Then I made a list. Every account, every authorization, every monthly payment that benefited Talia and Grayson. I circled each one with a red pen. By the time the sun went down, I had a file ready for the bank, one for Marvin and one for myself. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just worked methodical, focused like I did after Miguel died. It wasn't grief I felt now. It was clarity, cold and clear as glass. And once that kind of truth settles in your chest, it doesn't leave room for hope that's been misplaced. Talia wasn't preparing for my decline. She was preparing for my silence, and that was something I could no longer afford to give. Marvin referred me to someone discreet. His name was Julian Carr. He wore plain jackets, spoke in measured tones, and never asked questions that didn't serve a purpose. When I told him what I suspected, he didn't flinch, just nodded and said, "I'll need a week." It took 5 days. He returned with photographs, expense records, and transcripts that made my fingers stiff as I turned the pages. Dinners at high-end restaurants, spa visits on Wednesday afternoons, boutique shopping receipts for handbags that cost more than my monthly pension. Grayson's firm hadn't given him a raise in years, and Talia's job, while impressive on paper, didn't explain the lifestyle. Julian included a short audio clip. It wasn't dramatic, just a snippet from a brunch they'd attended with friends. A woman's voice asked if they ever felt guilty about taking so much help from family. Talia's response was easy, amused. "My mom. She's the tap. You turn her on when you need something, then shut her off when she starts asking questions." Grayson added, "Old money's still money, even if it's tired." I replayed that clip 3 times. Not out of shock. I think I was listening for something else, some hint of hesitation in her voice, a crack in the armor. But there wasn't one. After that, everything moved quickly. I booked a reservation at the restaurant she always used to celebrate her milestones. I asked for the table by the window, the one with enough room for 3. I requested a Friday evening, just enough time for the place to be full, but not loud. I wore the navy dress I bought years ago for a retirement party I never attended. It still fit. I planned the seating. I would be facing the room, facing the exit, facing witnesses. I knew Talia would make the toast. She always did. Even when she didn't pay the bill, she wanted the moment. Grayson would laugh, then shrink when the tide turned. He'd always followed her lead until someone stronger showed up. I rehearsed my line while folding laundry, while slicing apples, while brushing my teeth. I timed how long it would take to open the bank app. I memorized my phrasing. I wrote nothing down. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was a line, a clean one. Something she couldn't walk back or confuse or twist into another request, disguised as closeness. If she was going to say what she'd already thought for years, then I would say what I had prepared in silence. I didn't need her apology. I needed her awareness. and that was what I planned to give her. Served cold, beneath a linen napkin, under the glow of soft chandeliers with the city lights rising behind her. Talia didn't speak right away after I showed her the bank app. She blinked, then turned to Grayson, as if waiting for him to handle it, as if I were a confused clerk making a billing error. But he looked just as thrown. His composure cracked first. "You can't be serious," he said. "You've really cut off everything. That's elder cruelty." I tilted my head slightly. "No," I said. "What's cruel is using someone's love as your safety net, then mocking them while they're still footing the bill." Talia's eyes narrowed. "You think you're going to guilt me in a restaurant? I'm not here to guilt you. I'm here to inform you." I opened my purse again and slid out a single sheet of paper. I didn't need to show the originals. Copies were enough. The titles were visible. Account closures. Power revocations. Will revision acknowledgement. "I updated everything 2 days ago," I said. "You no longer have access to any financial accounts. Your name has been removed from all automatic payments. The apartment, the car, the insurance all canceled. And I changed my will." Her hand reached for the paper, but stopped midair. "I left everything to a foundation for women over 60. Women who gave everything to their families and were left with silence." Talia leaned back. Her jaw clenched so tightly I could hear the muscle shift. "You're doing this for an audience." "No, I'm doing it because you already had one. The brunches, the stories, the jokes at my expense. You've been performing your version of me for years. I just never stepped on stage." Grayson let out a tight breath and tried again. "You're upset. Let's talk about this somewhere private." "We've been private for decades," I said. "That's how you got comfortable." The tension in the room had changed. Subtle but present. I noticed a woman at the next table watching, not intruding, just listening. Her expression unreadable, but her attention fixed. Talia stood suddenly. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She glanced around and seemed to realize the moment had slipped from her control. "You're embarrassing yourself," she hissed. "No," I said calmly. "For once, I'm telling the truth where others can hear it." She stared at me, stunned, her mouth open as if grasping for a script that no longer fit the scene. I picked up my glass and took a final sip, then looked past her to the window behind. Outside, the lights of downtown glowed like distant candles, indifferent and steady. "Consider this the last check you'll ever receive from me," I said, setting my napkin on the table. And then I asked for the bill. The waiter approached quietly, unsure of the tension, but wise enough not to ask questions. I looked at him steady and soft. "Just mine, please." He nodded, glanced briefly at Talia and Grayson, both still frozen in their indignation, and left without a word. Talia's eyes were locked on me now, but she said nothing. She didn't ask me to stay, didn't offer a rebuttal. Maybe she realized there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make it worse. Maybe she still thought silence would shift the blame back to me. The check came on a small leather tray, crisp and impersonal. I opened my purse and took out the cash I had prepared earlier. Exact amount for the meal, plus a generous tip. Not because I had to, because I chose to. I placed the bills gently onto the tray, smoothing the top note with my palm. My hand lingered there for a moment. Old lined the same hand that had signed school permission slips, scribbled loan payments, filled out FAFSA forms, and covered rent more times than I could count. Once money had been my last way of holding on. Now it was my way of letting go. I looked up one final time, not at Talia, not at Grayson, but at the empty space between us. The space where gratitude should have lived. The space where a daughter might have said, "Thank you," or "I see you," or even just, "I'm sorry," but it stayed silent. I stood, slowly adjusting my coat with both hands, tucking the purse under my arm. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't offer warnings or blessings. I had already said everything worth hearing. As I walked past the other tables, no one stared, but I felt the ripple of awareness. Not judgment, just recognition. A woman walking out of something. Outside, the air was cool. A little wind pressed against my cheeks. I inhaled deeply, the way one does when stepping out of a too warm room into night. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking home carrying someone else's weight. I was just walking. And this time, I knew exactly where I was headed. 3 days passed before I checked my phone. 11 missed calls from Talia. 3 from numbers I didn't recognize but knew too well, lawyers likely, or someone sent to speak for her, when her own words failed. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. I tapped delete all and set the phone face down on the kitchen table. Outside, the soil in my backyard was soft from the morning rain. I slipped on my gloves, gathered the clippers, and returned to the roses I'd neglected during the weeks of silent planning. Some petals had browned at the edges, but the stems held strong. I pruned them, gently cut back what no longer served the growth beneath. Every inch of the garden had been planted by my hand, not to impress anyone, not to be noticed, but because tending something that gave back without demands felt like grace. As I buried the last bulb and pressed the earth around it, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Some things, I realized, still grow quietly, stubbornly, even after you stop watering the wrong roots. And in that soft, blooming silence, something in me finally began to bloom too.